All right, everyone. It is 2:01, and we will get started. I want to first start by thanking you all for attending. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. Appreciate your time with us today. I am very excited to be doing this webinar with a friend of ours, Steven Sears. We'll introduce him formally in a minute. But today we're going to talk about different strategies and reasons to actually continue training and managing training online. A couple of house cleaning items before we get into the webinar. First of all, please note that the webinar will be recorded and copies of the recording will be available to you as soon as we have them produced, probably on Monday. Please, if you have any questions, use the Q&A function available to you, and myself or Steven will address them as they come. I would also ask you to please keep your phones or your laptops on mute. My name is Samer Forsley. I'm the CEO of Simutech Multimedia. And without further ado, let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of things. What are the core issues of training and cost of training? And the main topic of today is knowledge degradation, especially in a time when people are not training and not at the plant or in a school setting. We have many schools joining us today, so we'll try to address some of the issues and concerns schools have during this period as well. That portion of the core issues will be addressed by Steven, and then I'll take care of the second portion of the webinar, which is creating a plan, some online tools and best practices, and Q&A. So with that, I would like to formally introduce Steven Sears. Steven has been working with Simutech for some time. He is a training manager at Fiat-Chrysler in Toledo. And he looks after training for his group. One of the most interesting thing about Steven is actually he's almost done a PhD in training. And his focus is on retention and closing that skills gap. And we couldn't find a better person to actually help us with this webinar than Steve. He has used the Simutech training system to aid in his research, and we thank him for his time. And with that, Steven, take it over.
Thank you, Samer. Good afternoon to everybody. One of the things that all organizations face is the cost of training. During my research, I reviewed the 2018 annual report from Training Magazine. They'd indicated that during that actual fiscal year, U.S.-based organizations spent over $87.6 billion on training. Now, that training, the cost of that training included wages for your internal developers, instructors, and your student employees, training facilities and equipment, and your trade-related costs, whether that be the travel costs sending your people to the training providers, or with paying for the cost of your training providers to travel to your facility, and for external consultants and training providers. Just kind of give you a little bit of background of, if you're not familiar with automotive industry, in automotive, we are highly automated. At the Toledo Assembly Complex, we really have two plants, the North Plant, which manufactures the Jeep Wrangler, and the South Plant, which manufactures the Jeep Gladiator. We have over 1,200 robots, countless numbers of PLCs, and other intelligent peripheral devices. So there's a lot of training that goes on. Over the past 2 years, actually from starting in mid-2017 through mid-2019, we did back-to-back major launches of those two facilities to accommodate the new vehicles. During that, we trained 36,000, a little over 36,000 hours, contact hours of skilled trades training at a cost to the plant. This is direct cost. This doesn't include the wages or facilities. This is just what we paid to outside providers to come in to do the training, was a little over $4.6 million. So we want to try to make sure that we get the best bang for the buck for what we spent. At Toledo, we have a total of 465 skilled trades on roll, of which 186 are electricians who we consider to be our first responders. They are critical to the operation to maintain to quickly maintain, diagnose, and repair the breakdowns. Because in our industry, a breakdown can get expensive really quick. If you're in the body shops or the paint shops, there are buffers to allow for repairing breakdowns. But when you get into the final lines, when that line stops, you stop making money. And downtime final for us is probably in excess of $10,000 a minute. So it's very important for us to get that, have our electricians be able to diagnose and repair the system in a quick matter of time. Unfortunately, just like with you probably experienced many of the troubleshooting skills that our technicians need to use. They're used infrequently. They learn it in training, but they might not have to recall that information for months, 6 months, or even years in some cases, which makes that learned skill and knowledge subject to degradation. Next, please. Research dating all the way back to the late 1800s has consistently indicated that you're going to lose about 25% of your learned skill and knowledge within 1 month of inactivity. So that includes going to training. Once you leave that training, if you don't do anything to keep that refreshed, you're going to start losing 25% of it 1 month post training. 25 to 100% of the skills learned will decrease over time due to the skill and knowledge degradation, which can lead to increases in errors, failed executions, extended breakdowns, and such loss of situational awareness. Next. Now, the factors addressing that affect retention is one, the learning method, whether it was in the classroom, through demonstration, through direct application. Classroom training, where you have somebody actually speaking to you, is probably the least effective means of transferring information. Direct application being the most effective. The task complexity, the number of dissimilar steps required to complete a task. You could have a task that if it has six different separate dissimilar tasks to it, it could be extremely complex versus task difficulty, which is how hard a task is to perform. So if a task is, it might only have 1 or 2 different steps to be performed in that task, it could definitely be more difficult to perform than something that has 6, 7, 8 different steps in it. Cognitive load, you've probably all experienced this before, whether you realized it or not. Cognitive load occurs when you have you've exceeded the functional capacity of your working memory. Think back to your college days, or when you were learning a new process. You get to the point where your head was just about ready to explode, just couldn't take anymore, and that's when you've gotten into the cognitive overload. And at that point in time, it's just best to walk away and take a break from it, because you're not going to learn anything beyond that point. Your mind's just not capable of doing it. And then we have the automation effect, which this is something that really don't get a lot of attention, but it's due to the loss of situational awareness due to the machine autonomy. The machines, I know in our application, a lot of times electricians are more babysitting the equipment. And then something happens, your alarms and bells start ringing, and then they're running around trying to figure out what's wrong. And the robots in particular will give you step-by-step a guide to what to go check. And they usually start off with the simplest to the most difficult. However, when the automated technology fails to provide that guidance, the skilled tradespeople are kind of at a loss, because they've lost that situational awareness. Electricians really a lot of times rely on smell, and sound to help them in their diagnosis. And they struggle to be able to effectively troubleshoot the equipment. Also leads to increased complacency with the skilled trades because they become reliant on the automated equipment. Next. So this slide right here kind of gives you a visual example of everything I just recently talked about. The red line shows the initial drop-off in training, where you would have 25% drop-off in learned skill and knowledge within the first 30 days. However, if you introduce some form of refresher training between the class and the 30 days, the drop-off will continue to kind of smooth out. You can see in the next line up, the orange line, that drop-off rate isn't as steep, okay, and it carries out further. And each time that you refresh that learning, the drop-off rate gets less and less and less. And you can effectively look at this as having a learning curve. If you lay that learning curve, the green line over it, the more and more that you refresh the training, you'll reach a point where the degradation is going to cease, and you're going to have you're going to plateau out, hopefully somewhere around 95 or more % of what's been learned. Next. So the cost of not doing training, we've already indicated that the cost of training is significant, but not doing the training can be even more costly. Not doing the training will reduce the operational throughput, which means lost productivity, poor quality, rework. Depending on your industry, you end up with aftermarket warranty repairs, customer dissatisfaction, and what have you. It also increases your mean time to repair. It's going to result in extended breakdowns and what I like to refer to as swaptronics. Electricians, once they kind of diminish that skill of actually being able to diagnose, they have a tendency to start replacing parts with the hopes that along the way they'll discover what was wrong and get the machine back in operation. At the end of the day, you've extended that downtime and you have a table full of parts that you're not sure if they're good or not. Increases the loss of critical skills. Again, when you're not doing that ongoing training, that refresher training, it's going to result in increased errors and increased execution times. And during this time of a lot of people being off of work, in our case, about half of our skilled tradesmen elected to take the layoff. The other half are in the plant maintaining the systems. We have systems that do need to be maintained, even though we're not running production right now. The increase in safety incidents because of the lost situational awareness. So when people come back to work, it's one thing you really don't want to focus on is making sure that they're refreshed on how to conduct themselves in a safe way in and around your operations. And then the loss of organizational resources. As I mentioned earlier, Training Magazine identified that U.S.-based corporations organizations back in 2018 spent $87.6 billion, of which 25% of that is basically lost within 30 days. So if you look at it, it's about $22 billion in lost resources. Kind of what our government spends on a daily basis, but as an organization, you don't want to do that. So to put it in your own terms, simplify it, just think for every $1,000 spent on training, you're only getting $750 worth of value back on that. Next. So if I can leave you with some key takeaways from this, you want to treat training as an investment, not as a cost. In order to justify that, you want to be able to measure your cost benefits, do cost benefit ratios, do return on investments. I spend a lot of money on training, bringing outside agencies in to perform that training, but it's all justifiable because we simply look at downtime reports. I had mentioned that having a lost downtime in the final line, we're losing upwards of $10,000 a minute or more. So when I can go in and look at downtime reports and show that we can justify spending this money because we're actually saving it in the long run, helps you be able to push these through. You want to design the training for retention, okay, which means you want to use a high hands-on ratio. That's how skilled trades learn, is by doing. But use new learnings, use simulations. Use job aids to reinforce training, especially if you're buying training from an outside vendor. A service manual does not make a good training manual. You want to make sure that they're providing your technicians with quick reference guides, pocket guides, develop SNPs for critical skills within your plants. You want to evaluate training for retention. Rather than, a lot of times providers come in, they do training, they buy donuts every morning, buy pizza on Friday, and then give a post-test, and a lot of times they'll walk people through the post-test. What we do is we delay our post-test. Even if our providers give post-test at the end of class, we'll take that, we'll put it into a Google's form, and have our skilled trades go out and do it 30 days later, 60 days later, 90 days later, to see what they actually retain from the course. Do skills tests. Do that again, 30 days, 60 days, 180 days later. Put them into either out on your actual production equipment if you can, or into a controlled robotic lab area if you have that available to you, to see if they can actually perform the task within a timely amount of time. And then again, simulation is very good for this. We use a Semitech system for evaluating skill retention, basic troubleshooting skills within our complex. And then focus on closing your skill and knowledge gaps. When we do refresher training, we don't bring somebody in and do a 40-hour PLC class or a 40-hour robotics class, whatever the case may be. We look at the gaps that we're seeing out on the floor. We can identify that through our downtime reports, and then we'll tailor that training specifically to meet those performance gaps, which means we're not running 40-hour classes. We're maybe running 4-hour classes, 8-hour classes, and that type of things. And I guess the easiest thing to look at, and the easiest takeaway from this, is a lot of times less is more. If you can scale down what you're giving these people when you're training them, keep the amount of content they're receiving so they don't hit a saturation point, they're more likely to retain much more information. Samer, back to you.
All right, before I get into my portion, I just want to see if we have any questions that come in. Just 1 second. Will the copy be available? Yes. Yes. Okay. So yes, absolutely. A copy of the slides and the video actually of the webinar will be made available to everyone, most likely early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. Please, if you have any questions for myself or Steven, use the Q&A function and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So with that, thank you, Steve, for your amazing insight on your research over the years and what you're doing at Chrysler. I'm going to take a minute to talk about online training. Just given the importance of continuous training and the loss of knowledge retention when you are not practicing. Today, we have a lot of our customers are either working extra to meet demand or in a layoff position where staff is not training. So If you're new to us and if you don't know who we are, Simutech's been around for 24 years now. We specialize in troubleshooting, teaching maintenance staff to become effective troubleshooters for electrical components. We've been serving over 250 schools, over 800 companies. And really that's our core, is that simulation, and using simulation training and assessments and data to get people to understand the concept, but also retain that concept. So with that, I am going to talk about online training. So a few things that are important when you're thinking about putting a training plan online, especially when you don't have access to staff on a day-to-day basis. You absolutely must have a plan. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but this plan must map out the day-to-day activities of the staff and try to figure out what areas they need additional help with. Make sure you have the tools you need to actually managing that training and deploy it. Share that plan with the team. Make sure they understand what is required of them, what the expectations are. Stay on top of it and assess and review. And very much like Steven mentioned, assessment has to be continuous and training has to be continuous. So when it comes to the plan, first thing you should do, if you haven't done so already, is to kind of map out their days, map out the different issues they face on an ongoing basis. And once you have an inventory of what they work on, conduct an assessment. It's really good to get a baseline of what their knowledge is today before they get started with the training. It's good to capture that so you know how they're improving and what they're retaining over time. Then you need to assemble the content they need to address whether it's a knowledge gap they have or whether it's something you want to reinforce. So that content could be material you create, it could be online learning that you purchase from someone, it could be simulations, very much like we provide. The next thing you need to do is create a schedule. A plan that doesn't have concrete schedules where people are accountable and in the seat to actually do the training and do the work, it's not going to get you much. So having that commitment is very important. And for that, one of our customers a few years ago asked us to help them create a commitment letter. It's very simple. We have it available on our blog. Actually, you can go there and grab it and use it. It documents the fact that the manager is committing to purchasing the training and committing to scheduling the hours needed for the employee to train. And they sign off on that, and the employee commits to actually completing the training on time and as scheduled. It just creates that contract and that social commitment so that everybody understands what is expected. And again, we're going to talk about that again, a couple times today, is assessment, continuous assessment. As people are training, it's good to kind of give them the test or the assessment over and over again, especially in a remote setting, just to see what have they done and what they've completed so far. So some tools. These are the tools that we thought would be handy to have, and many of those you may have already. Check with your teams, check with your IT departments. But to start with, you need some conferencing tools. We at Simutech use almost all of them because our customers use all of them. But whether it's Google Meet or Zoom or Skype, which is maybe part of your Microsoft package, or Google Meet, which is part of your Google email package, those tools let you communicate with the team, share documents. So for example, if you wanted to review the training plan with them, it's a great way of doing it. As they are training, if you want a quick communication, tools like Slack or HipChat, or you might have your own internal tool as well, lets you send them quick messages, checking in on them. How's the training going? How's life going? How's work going? It's a great way to actually get feedback back and forth. We rely, and obviously there are many screen sharing tools, but the ones that I have listed here allow you to access their screens while they are working. This is very handy if you want to show them something. Especially, let's say they're in a simulation, one of ours, and they need help with something, you can take control and show them. It's a very handy tool at actually giving information quickly, and not like, oh no, it's, you know, what are you clicking on? What are you clicking on? It's a way for you to actually take control and help them when they need. You might have SAP or some tool for scheduling. If you don't, tools like Resource Guru or When I Work helps you schedule the training or any task that they have. And they're great ways to actually, for not very expensive, manage the day-to-day of the staff. And another tool that goes well with those is time tracking tools like Time Doctor, for example. It really lets you observe what they are training and does a full accounting of how much time is spent on each task. It helps you recover a lot of lost activity, but more importantly, make sure that the time spent training is focused time on training. And last but not least, I want to stress the importance of task lists and checklists. Part of your training plan should be a checklist that includes all the things that you want them to achieve. And they can go and check those things off as they are going through their day. And these tools are fairly effective and cheap as well, that you can and should include as part of your full training package to make sure that people are on task and checking things off. And it does help them get motivated when they're seeing that task list gets shorter and shorter as they are progressing. When it comes to the learning itself, these are the things that you need to put it together. So you need some learning management system to keep track of who has what their training is, what's the learning path. So you may have tools like Cornerstone, which tend to be enterprise LMS solutions. If you're a smaller company or a school, you could have something like Moodle or Blackboard or Talent LMS. We work with them quite a bit for customers who have their own LMSs, but they don't need an enterprise solution. We work with Talent LMS. Of course, for customers who don't have any, we provide for free an LMS. So we have our course manager, but we also have for our web sessions or our web training, we provide our own LMS for customers to actually deploy training. You need to have base content. And so whether you create that content yourself, whether you're sending people to school, whether you're buying an e-learning product from TPC or DuPont or whatever, you need some base content. Even YouTube is handy. We include base content in our training, but if you want something broader that includes mechanical or HVAC, whatever, look online, look for other partners and providers to see what e-learning based content they have for you. But then they need to reinforce all that learning. So that's where practical hands-on practice comes into play. So a couple ways you can do that. You can do that with a workbench, at the plant level, if you have that. Of course, today you don't have access to that because people are not at work. But we at Simutech really replicate all those workbenches and all these scenarios in a digital format. So we use simulation training to allow people to navigate between different scenes and troubleshoot and learn how to troubleshoot with tools like a meter or a laptop or a PLC or a wrench or a screwdriver, et cetera, to troubleshoot and solve the problem. And last but not least, I want to stress on assessment. So make sure you're assessing all the time. So whether you're creating a quiz in the LMS and deploying that over time, whether you're doing an interview with them to understand verbally and have them repeat what they learned and checking off what they're supposed to learn, or you're using the Simutech built-in assessment tools. And that comes in handy for schools especially. I know we have many schools here today, but if your students are learning online, it's a great way for you to create a custom test and send it to them. And then by them filling it, you get all the data and the results to allow you to score them. And it's the same with industry. You create the custom test, you assign it to an individual, and over time you get to see their progress and how they're tracking. And just very important for us, before they come back to work, make sure they do follow some practice guidelines and actually do some work. I am showing here on the side our latest and greatest module that's online, and that's teaching control circuits. But the important thing here is that professionals, whether they're golfers or kickers or a quarterback, they always take a practice shot before they go back on the field. And they take it even though the stop in time from the last time they did it is very short. If you think about a golfer, they take a shot, they walk, practice shot, then take the real thing. Imagine for someone who hasn't been on the line for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, make sure they spend some time practicing. And whether that's practicing online through a simulation tool like ours, like we're showing here, or any other tool that you can come up with, just for everybody's sake, so that you reduce safety and downtime issues, make sure they spend the time practicing before they come back and do some real work. Some best practices that we can recommend. First of all, make sure you have some progression for them, some reward, whether that is tied, whether the training completion is tied to a raise or different hours or whatever you can come up with. Be creative, but it is important to monitor their progress, but also make sure they're being rewarded for their progress. We always talk about make sure you schedule them for 2 hours. I know from what Steven was mentioning that you get to that saturation point. In our world, we've seen 2 hours to be effective at a time. So don't just put them there and have them train nonstop forever. That is not effective. They're not retaining. We want them to do about 2-hour sessions at a time, come back and continuously train. And even if they finish something, have them do it again and again, because like Steven showed, you want that knowledge should be reinforced and retained in their mind. Assess before and after. We're talking about assessment quite a bit, but assess before they start, assess after they do the training, assess continuously. It's going to make sure that you have the data you need to make sure that they are progressive. So that is all we had for today. I have left my email address here if you need to follow up with us and have any questions, whether it's for me or Steven. I will take a minute to see if we have any questions right now in the channel. I don't see any here. So, you know, we have a question. Is there a tried and true method for checking on training? Do you want to take that on, Steven?
A tried and true method on checking for training?
Or checking in on training, I guess. Or what are some of the best methods that you have seen for making sure somebody is actually following up on the training and managing that training?
I guess the best tool for managing it is being in contact with the people. Just don't assign them something, walk away hoping that they're following up on their own training. I think you have to have that continuous involvement all the time to make sure that the training is being conducted in a suitable way. I actually audit a lot of classes, which means I'll go in, sit at the back of the classroom for half hour, 4 hours if I need to make sure that the content is what we paid for, what we're expecting. So.
We do seem to have a few questions here, and I'm not sure I'm able to get to them. Luciana, if you're on the line, can you check to see if you can see them? Is there a way to mandate the training sections are completed in Simutech before they get to the troubleshooting exercise? I noticed they can be skipped. Okay, yeah. So what Robert is talking about, there's two components in our training. There's the learning, which is like, for example, in the motors course, you get to learn what is a motor, how it's wired up, what is load, how different things could go wrong with a motor, etc. So there's that learning component, and people get into the troubleshooting. We have two products in the market today. We have our traditional product that many of you know. In those cases, we can't control or you can't force them down the learning path, and that's by design in a way, because we don't know if you have that content created already on the side. So we don't enforce that in the current model. We have the online model, which is the 3D model that we are starting to roll out. That one does let you force people to go through the training, the content first before you get into the sims. So that one integrates nicely into your own LMS if you have one, and you can create your own learning path. Or if you're in ours, the learning path is created for you and it's forced down that path. So let me see, we have a couple more maybe. How do you manage simulations as a learning using online tools? What is the best way to manage homework in a virtual environment? All right, so actually, Steven, you want to take the first one? I'll take the second one. How do you manage simulations as a learning using online tools? What do you guys do today?
As far as managing the simulations, we schedule people for the training, and using the course manager, I have the ability to go in and monitor their progress. So for us, from a simulation standpoint, that's the most effective tool that we have.
Okay, and just the other question is more schools related. Again, in our simulations, you can see which sections people have completed and if they're successful with them in our own course manager. And so what you're able to do is then progress through and see if people are completing their sections, and you can give them a score for that. But the best way for you to actually get a real test number or a score is for you to assign them a custom test. So in our tool, you go to custom assessments, create a custom test, pick the faults you want to score them on, and deploy it to them. And then as they complete them, you get your score. So that's the best way to make sure that they are understanding the homework and completing it. Is it compatible with Workday? I'm not familiar with Workday. If Workday is SCORM compliant, then yes. Is Simutech available online? Yes, so there's two offerings in the market right now. There is one that you have to install on a PC, and that one syncs all the data in the cloud. And so as long as a student or an employee can install it, they have access to it, and they can work from home. There's nothing needed in a lab environment or in a classroom environment. We do have our 3D content that we're starting to roll out, and that is available through a browser. So you just need a Chrome browser, and you're able to go through the simulations. What online simulations tool would you suggest? So I'm biased here. Of course, we're gonna pick ours, but there are a couple of other simulation tools out there. We don't think they are fully featured as ours. So I'm not sure. Steven, maybe you can answer that as a neutral third party if you've looked at others and what you discovered over time.
I don't know if I would consider myself a neutral third party, but
You're
when I
more
was doing
neutral
my
than me, so.
research, I needed to have a tool for evaluating retention that would be available to other potential researchers down the road. One thing about research is after I post my findings, other researchers are going to have to go out and try to duplicate it and see what kind of results they get. So I spent a lot of time looking at the tools available commercially for me to use, and Simutech was the one that I chose to use. The nice thing about it, we were able to use one of the standard modules. We just kept it very simple using the first module, electrical troubleshooting. But I was able to capture those scores that that our attendees or my participants scored during their initial session, during the initial skills test. And then I was able to go back and create, using the custom test feature, go back in and recreate that same test and deliver it to them, 2 months down the road to see what they retained. So again, I'm kind of biased, but I did a lot of research, looked at a lot of different competitors to Simutech, and I found Simutech to be a very good system to utilize.
All right, thanks for the plug. Appreciate it. There's a question on deployment through Moodle, and so as long as it is school compliant, you should be able to deploy through Moodle. There was another portion to that. Yeah. So, how long does the license last? So our licenses don't necessarily last from the time they get started. Usually, our customers purchase from us, and that contract is valid for a year. And so you have access to whatever you purchase for the year. And so if you purchase 10 licenses for your team, let's say, the clock starts on when we set you up, and then you have a year from that point on. So, and all licenses expire at the same time. More specific, what package of Simutech would you suggest for training institute that can have training in person at this time? For example, the students are at home. Yeah, so just for that last question from Tony. So we have 7 learning areas right now. We're adding an 8th one fairly soon. The first one, our troubleshooting electrical circuits, it's fundamental. It is going to teach you the basics, like how to use a meter, how to use a schematic, how to use a wiring diagram, and so on. But more importantly, it's going to teach you how to troubleshoot. So we have this 5-step methodology that we want everybody, whether it's in a school setting or whether it's on a plant setting, to troubleshoot and think through problems the same way. We've been working on this process for a long time, and we feel that's the ideal process to help you troubleshoot. And so that first module is key and fundamental to learning to troubleshoot. From that point on, if you're in a school setting and you're teaching motors, of course, you need to cover motors and the motors program. However, in our world, the way we lay out our content, we feel is the optimal way of actually learning. So you do your troubleshooting first, then you learn about control circuits, then motors, then you get into PLCs. And then the rest from that point on is process control. So then you're getting into more complex situations. You're getting into sensors and 420 milliamp loops and so on. So it builds on, so you can't really jump into the deep end. You really have to go through that progression. But the first module is key. You have to absolutely do well and have a good score in the first one before you can really know that you're really ready to actually do the work. What else? Checking ROI. Steve, how do you measure ROI, and what do you track actually for in terms of indicators of if something is working in terms of training?
Yeah, the return on investment, the ROI, I mean, it's simply just a ratio between what you're spending for the training versus what your return for that is. It's going to come down to your industry, really. For us, downtime is a factor that's tracked for us, and we further break that down into analysis time, actual repair time, time getting the parts, locating the parts, time we had to wait for a technician to show up at the failure. From what I'm interested in, I'm really interested in the analysis time. If I can reduce the amount of analysis time, then in the end, we're getting back up and running a lot quicker. So I know what our cost is, depending on where the breakdown occurs, whether it's in the beginning of the process, what we call the body shop or the paint shop or assembly area. Further you get into the process, the more cost you're incurring for breakdowns. So I know what our downtime cost is by area, and I know what our cost is for sending people. I know what our hourly rate or even what our fully loaded rate is. So you just have to find out what works for you.
All right. I think that is the rest of the questions anyway. So I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank specifically Steven for taking the time to preparing the slides. The video will be made available to you all next week. And I have my email available. Please send any email questions to me or to Steven. I'll forward them to him and you'll have a follow-up. So with that, thank you, Steve. I appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Daniel.
And have a good weekend, everyone, and stay safe out there.